The ice cracked beneath her feet like a gunshot, and before Josephine Owens could scream, the frozen river swallowed her whole into its black depths. The winter of 1882 had turned Reno, Nevada, into a landscape of white desolation. Josephine had been foolish. She knew that now as the freezing water shocked every nerve in her body into paralyzed terror. She had been trying to take a shortcut across the Truckee River to reach the general store before closing time, and the ice that had seemed so solid from the riverbank had betrayed her in an instant. The cold was beyond anything she had ever imagined, crushing her chest, stealing her breath, turning her limbs to lead as she thrashed beneath the surface. Her heavy winter coat and long skirts dragged her down like anchors, and the current beneath the ice pulled at her with cruel insistence. She managed to break the surface once, gasping, her lungs burning as she tried to grab the jagged edge of ice, but it broke away in her numb fingers. The hole she had fallen through seemed impossibly far above her already as the current dragged her sideways beneath the frozen surface. Her vision started to blur, dark spots dancing at the edges as the cold drove deeper into her bones. This was how it would end, she thought with strange clarity. 22 years old, unmarried, and about to drown in a frozen river because she had been too impatient to walk the long way around. Then something crashed through the ice above her, and strong arms wrapped around her waist. Ethan Keller had been riding along the river road when he saw the woman's dark cloak disappear through the ice. He did not think, did not hesitate. He threw himself off his horse, running across the more solid ice near the shore, following the shadow he could see moving beneath the surface. He grabbed the axe from his saddle as he ran, using it to smash through the ice ahead of where the current was carrying her. The freezing water hit him like 1,000 knives as he plunged in, but he ignored it, diving down to grab hold of the sinking woman. She was barely conscious, her eyes rolling back, her lips already blue. Ethan wrapped one arm tight around her and used the other to pull them both up through the hole he had created. Breaking the surface, he gasped for air, then immediately started dragging her toward the shore. The ice cracked ominously around them, but he kept moving, kept pulling, his muscles screaming in protest as the cold tried to steal his strength to his horse. A steady bay gelding named Copper stood waiting at the riverbank. Ethan hauled Josephine onto solid ground and immediately began working to save her life. He had seen men die from cold before, knew exactly how little time they had. He stripped off her sodden cloak and began rubbing her arms and legs vigorously, trying to force blood back through her frozen limbs. She was not breathing right, taking shallow, gasping breaths that barely moved her chest. "Come on, stay with me," he said, his own teeth chattering so hard he could barely form words. "You are not dying today, do you hear me? Not today." He pulled off his own coat, which was soaked through on one side but still dry on the other, and wrapped it around her. Then he lifted her onto Copper's back and swung up behind her, holding her against his chest as he urged the horse into a gallop. His homestead was closer than town, just over the next rise. Every second counted now. The ride felt endless. Ethan kept talking to her, kept checking that she was still breathing, still alive. Her whole body shook with violent tremors, which was actually a good sign. It meant she was not too far gone yet. When his small ranch house came into view, he nearly sobbed with relief. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them, and went straight to the fireplace. The embers from the morning fire still glowed faintly, and he quickly built it back up into a roaring blaze. Then, knowing propriety had no place when death was so close, he began the difficult work of removing her frozen clothing. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, working quickly and efficiently, replacing each sodden garment with one of his own shirts, then wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He stripped off his own wet clothes down to his union suit, then did the only thing he knew would work. He climbed beneath the blankets with her, using his own body heat to warm her frozen form. She was still shaking violently, her skin like ice against his, but slowly, gradually, he felt warmth begin to return. Hours passed. Ethan held her close, monitoring her breathing, keeping the fire fed. At some point, exhaustion claimed him, and he fell into an uneasy sleep. When Josephine opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a ceiling she did not recognize. The second thing she registered was that she was warm, wonderfully warm, wrapped in blankets and pressed against something solid and comforting. Her body ached everywhere, a deep bone ache that made her want to whimper, but she was alive. She was breathing. Her heart was beating. Then she realized the solid warmth beside her was a man. She jerked back instinctively, which sent pain shooting through her stiff muscles. The movement woke him, and dark blue eyes snapped open just inches from her own. For a long moment, they stared at each other in mutual shock. "You are awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep and relief. "Thank God, I was starting to worry you would not come back around." Josephine tried to speak, but her throat was raw and aching. She managed a hoarse whisper. "Who are you?" "Ethan Keller, madam. I pulled you out of the river." "You fell through the ice." The memory came rushing back. The crack, the fall, the terrible cold, and then those arms wrapping around her beneath the water. She looked at him properly now, taking in the strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, the concern in his eyes, the wet hair still plastered to his head. He had saved her life. He had jumped into that frozen river and saved her life. "I remember," she whispered. "You came in after me." "Could not very well let you drown," he said, as if jumping into a frozen river was the most natural thing in the world. "How do you feel? Can you move your fingers and toes?" She tested them carefully, relief flooding through her when everything responded. "Yes, they hurt, but they move." "Good." "That is very good." He carefully extracted himself from the blankets, grabbing a robe that hung nearby and wrapping it around himself. "I apologize for the impropriety, madam, but you were dying from the cold. Body heat was the fastest way to warm you." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "You saved my life. I am not about to fault you for doing what needed to be done." She looked down at herself, realizing she was wearing a man's shirt several sizes too large. "My clothes," drying by the fire. They were frozen solid. "I will turn my back while you check yourself over. Make sure you have all your feeling back." He was true to his word, turning to face the wall while she carefully moved each limb, checking for frostbite. Her fingers and toes hurt terribly, but they were pink, not the white or black that would indicate serious damage. She had been incredibly lucky. "I think I am all right," she said quietly. "Sore and aching, but all right." He turned back, relief evident on his handsome features. "Good." "That is good. What is your name, madam?" Josephine Owens. "I live in town with my aunt. She will be worried sick about me." "Town is about 3 miles from here. Once you are feeling strong enough, I will take you back, but I do not think you should try to move too much just yet. Your body has been through a terrible shock." As if to prove his point, Josephine tried to sit up and immediately felt dizzy. Ethan was beside her in an instant, his hand steadying her shoulder. "Easy now. No rush. You are safe here." She looked up at him, at this stranger who had risked his own life without hesitation to save hers, and felt something shift in her chest. "Why did you do it? You could have died too." He looked puzzled by the question. "You needed help. What else would I have done?" "Most people would have run for help, not jumped in themselves. By the time I brought help, you would have been dead," he said simply. "So I jumped in." It was matter of fact, without bravado or false modesty. He had seen someone in mortal danger and acted without thought for his own safety. Josephine had never met anyone like him. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for my life." He smiled then, a warm, genuine smile that transformed his face. "You are most welcome, Miss Owens. Now let me get you some hot broth. You need to get your strength back." Over the next few hours, Josephine learned about the man who had saved her. Ethan was 26, had come to Nevada 5 years ago from Wyoming, and ran a small but successful cattle ranch on his own. He had lost his parents to cholera when he was 19, and his younger sister had married and moved to California 2 years ago. He was quiet, self-sufficient, and Josephine noted with growing interest, unmarried. He made her sip warm broth, kept the fire roaring, and checked periodically to make sure she was not developing fever. As the day wore into evening, Josephine's clothes dried enough to be wearable, though they were still damp and cold. "You should stay the night," Ethan said when she mentioned trying to make it back to town. "It is getting dark and you are still weak. I will sleep out in the barn with the horses. You can have the bed." "I cannot put you out of your own bed. And besides, if I stay overnight without a chaperone, my reputation will be ruined," Josephine protested, though part of her desperately wanted to stay in this warm, safe place. "Your reputation will be even more ruined if you freeze to death trying to make it back to town after dark," Ethan pointed out. "Besides, I am the only one who knows you stayed, and I am certainly not going to tell anyone." In the end, practicality won. Josephine was simply too weak to make the journey, and Ethan was right that traveling in the dark would be dangerous. She took the bed, and he took his blankets to the barn as promised. But Josephine could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ice breaking beneath her feet, felt the crushing cold of the water. She got up and paced the small cabin, looking at the evidence of Ethan's life. It was neat and orderly, with books on a shelf, a few tintype photographs of people she assumed were his family, and basic furniture that he had clearly made himself. Everything spoke of a man who was capable, self-reliant, and solitary. She was standing by the window when a light appeared in the barn doorway, and Ethan emerged, clearly unable to sleep either. He saw her silhouette in the window and hesitated, then walked back to the house. She opened the door before he could knock. "Could not sleep either?" he asked. "Every time I close my eyes, I am back under the ice," she admitted. "That will fade in time. Come, sit by the fire. No point in both of us being miserable and alone." They sat together in front of the fireplace, wrapped in separate blankets, and talked. Really talked, in a way Josephine had never talked with anyone before. He told her about growing up in Wyoming, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the hard years after his parents died when he and his sister nearly starved. She told him about coming to Nevada with her aunt after her own father died, about her dreams of one day owning a bookshop, about the suffocating expectations of small-town society. "You wanted to open a bookshop?" Ethan asked with interest. "What stopped you?" "Money, propriety, the fact that everyone says a woman running a business on her own is improper," Josephine listed. "Take your pick." "That seems foolish. If you have the skill and the drive, why should it matter whether you are a man or a woman?" "I like the way you think, Mr. Keller." "Ethan, please. I think after I have seen you in your undergarments, we can dispense with formalities." Josephine laughed, surprising herself. Hours ago she had been dying in a frozen river, and now she was laughing. "All right, Ethan. Then you must call me Josephine, or Joe if you prefer." "Joe," he said, testing it out. "I like that. It suits you." As dawn broke, Ethan saddled Copper and helped Josephine up onto the horse. Her clothes were dry now, if somewhat worse for wear, and her strength had returned enough for travel. He swung up behind her and they rode toward Reno together. The town was already buzzing with news of her disappearance. Her aunt, Martha Owens, was standing on the porch of the boarding house they ran together, her face drawn with worry. When she saw Josephine, she nearly collapsed with relief. "Josie? Oh, thank God, I thought you had died. Where have you been? What happened?" The story came out in a rush, with half the town gathering to listen. Josephine told them about falling through the ice, and Ethan filled in the part about pulling her out. By the end, people were clapping Ethan on the back, calling him a hero, insisting on buying him drinks. But through it all, Josephine noticed how uncomfortable Ethan looked with the attention. He kept trying to deflect, to minimize what he had done, to leave. She caught his eye across the crowd and mouthed, "Thank you one more time." He nodded, a small private smile just for her, and then he was gone, riding back to his ranch alone. Aunt Martha fussed over Josephine for days, barely letting her out of bed. The doctor confirmed she had been extraordinarily lucky. No permanent damage from the cold, no fever or infection. But Josephine found she could not stop thinking about the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. A week later, when she was finally allowed to leave the house, the first thing she did was bake a pie. Apple, which took most of her meager savings to make in the middle of winter. Then she borrowed the boarding house's old mare and rode out to Ethan's ranch. He was mending a fence when she arrived, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the cold, revealing strong forearms. He looked up in surprise when he heard the horse approaching. "Joe, what are you doing all the way out here?" "I brought you something," she said, dismounting carefully and retrieving the pie from her saddlebag. "To say thank you properly this time." He took the pie, looking genuinely touched. "You did not have to do this." "I wanted to. Besides, I needed to get out of the house. My aunt has been treating me like I am made of glass. Can you blame her? You nearly died." "Because of you, I did not," Josephine said firmly. "So I thought perhaps you might let me repay you by helping around the ranch today. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I am quite handy with a needle." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You do not owe me anything, Joe, I know, but I would like to help anyway, if you will let me." He smiled then, that warm smile that made her heart skip. "All right. The truth is, I have been putting off mending some torn shirts for weeks. If you are truly willing, I would appreciate the help." They spent the day together, falling into an easy rhythm. Josephine mended his shirts while Ethan worked on repairing tack, and they talked about everything and nothing. She found herself laughing more than she had in months, found herself watching the way his hands moved as he worked, found herself not wanting the day to end. When the sun started to sink low, Ethan insisted on escorting her back to town. "I am not about to let you ride alone in the dark, not after everything that happened." The ride back was quiet, companionable. When they reached the boarding house, Ethan helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "It was nice having company. I enjoyed it too. Perhaps I could come again if you would not mind." "I would like that very much." It became a pattern over the following weeks. Josephine would ride out to the ranch 2 or 3 times a week, always with some excuse, bringing food or offering to help with chores. Ethan would welcome her warmly, and they would spend hours together, working side by side and talking endlessly. The townsfolk began to notice, to gossip, but neither of them cared. Aunt Martha, however, was less sanguine about the situation. "People are talking, Josie," she said one evening. "They say you are spending too much time alone with that cowboy, that it is not proper." "He saved my life, Aunt Martha. Surely that earns him some consideration." Be that as it may, you need to think about your reputation. You are a young, unmarried woman. You cannot be riding out to a bachelor's ranch unchaperoned several times a week. I am 22 years old, not 16. I think I can decide for myself who I spend time with. Not if you want to maintain any standing in this community. You cannot, Martha said sharply. I am not saying you cannot see him, just that you need to be more circumspect. Invite him to church socials, to dinners here at the house where I can chaperone. But these private visits need to stop. Josephine knew her aunt was right, at least about the social consequences. But she did not want to give up those precious hours alone with Ethan, where they could talk freely without the town watching and judging their every word and gesture. The next time she rode out to the ranch, she told Ethan about her aunt's concerns. He listened quietly, then nodded. She is right. I have been selfish, not thinking about how this might affect your reputation. We should not see each other anymore, not like this. No, Josephine said firmly. That is not what I want. I do not care what the town thinks. But you should care. You have to live here, have to face these people every day. I will not be the reason you become a social pariah. Then what do you suggest? That we only see each other in public, with chaperones and gossiping busybodies watching our every move. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. I could court you, properly, formally, with your aunt's permission. That would make our time together acceptable. Josephine's heart began to race. Is that what you want, to court me? He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. Joe, I have been half in love with you since you opened your eyes in my bed, and the first thing you did was thank me. I think about you constantly, count the hours until I see you again. If you will have me, I would like nothing more than to court you properly. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. I think I have been half in love with you too since the moment you pulled me from that river. Yes, Ethan. Yes, I would very much like you to court me. He crossed the room to her then, taking her hands in his. I do not have much to offer, a small ranch, a simple life, but what I have is yours if you want it. I do not need much, she said softly, just you. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Josephine felt warmth flood through her that had nothing to do with the fire, felt her whole world realign around this moment, this man. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. I should probably ask your aunt's permission before I kiss you again, Ethan said, sounding dazed. Probably, Josephine agreed, though she made no move to step away from him. But I am glad you kissed me first. The formal courtship that followed was the talk of Reno. Ethan came to town every Sunday for church, sitting with Josephine and her aunt. He was invited to dinner at the boarding house twice a week, where he charmed Aunt Martha with his quiet good manners and obvious devotion to her niece. They went on chaperoned walks, attended town socials together, and were generally the model of propriety. But Josephine still found ways to ride out to the ranch once a week, and if they stole kisses by the fire when they thought no one was watching, well, some things were worth the risk. Spring came to Nevada, melting the snow and ice that had nearly claimed Josephine's life. The Truckee River flowed free and clear, and she could not look at it without remembering both the terror of drowning and the miracle of being saved. 3 months into their courtship, Ethan asked Aunt Martha for permission to marry Josephine. Martha gave her blessing readily, having come to genuinely like and respect the young rancher. The wedding was planned for June, a simple affair at the town church followed by a celebration at the boarding house. But a week before the wedding, trouble arrived in Reno in the form of Thomas Owens, Josephine's cousin. He was Martha's nephew, the son of her late brother, and he had come from San Francisco with strong opinions about his cousin's upcoming marriage. "A cowboy," he said scornfully when Martha introduced him. "You are letting Josephine marry a cowboy who lives in a shack in the middle of nowhere. What about her prospects, her future?" "Ethan is a good man who owns his own land and works hard," Martha said firmly. "And more importantly, Josephine loves him." "Love," Thomas scoffed. "What does love matter when she could do so much better?" "I have connections in San Francisco, business associates who would be interested in meeting a young woman of quality. She could marry a banker, a lawyer, someone with real prospects." Josephine, who had been listening from the next room, walked in at that moment. "I could also marry someone I actually care about, who treats me as an equal rather than a possession. Novel concept, I know." Thomas looked her up and down with barely disguised disdain. "You are making a mistake, cousin, throwing your life away on some nobody cowboy who pulled you out of a river. What kind of life can he give you? Poverty, isolation, endless work with nothing to show for it." "He can give me a life where I am loved and respected," Josephine said coldly. "Where I am a partner, not a decoration. That is worth more to me than all the money in San Francisco." "You are a fool," Thomas said flatly. "But then, women usually are when it comes to matters of the heart. Fortunately, your aunt still has legal authority over you until you are married, and I intend to convince her that this wedding is a terrible idea." Over the following days, Thomas launched a campaign to undermine Ethan and stop the wedding. He spread rumors around town about Ethan's finances, suggesting the ranch was failing and that he was only marrying Josephine for her aunt's money. He went to the church and tried to convince the pastor that the marriage was ill-advised. He even rode out to Ethan's ranch to confront him directly. Ethan was working with one of his horses when Thomas arrived. He recognized the man immediately from Josephine's description, the expensive clothes and superior attitude unmistakable. "Mr. Keller, I presume," Thomas said, dismounting. "I am Thomas Owens, Josephine's cousin. I think we need to have a conversation about your upcoming wedding." "I am not sure we have anything to discuss," Ethan said evenly, continuing to work. "The wedding is between Joe and myself with her aunt's blessing." "Yes, well, Aunt Martha is getting old and sentimental. She does not see clearly what a mistake this marriage would be." "I think she sees just fine." Ethan finished with the horse and turned to face Thomas fully. "What is it you really want? Because I do not think you rode all the way out here just to insult me. I want you to break off the engagement. Tell Josephine you have had a change of heart, that you realized you cannot provide the life she deserves. Walk away cleanly, and I will make it worth your while. Say $500. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he started to laugh, a genuine laugh of disbelief. "You think I can be bought off? You think my feelings for Joe are so shallow that I would abandon her for money?" "Every man has his price," Thomas said confidently. "If 500 is not enough, I can go higher. $1,000. That is more than your entire ranch is probably worth." "My ranch is worth a hell of a lot more than that, and even if it was not, I would not trade Joe for all the money in the world," Ethan said, his voice turning hard. "Now I suggest you get back on your horse and ride back to town before I forget my manners." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You are making a powerful enemy, Mr. Keller. I have connections, influence. I can make your life very difficult." "You can try," Ethan said. "But I am marrying Joe in 6 days, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Now get off my land." Thomas left, but his campaign continued. He went to Aunt Martha and presented her with false documents claiming Ethan had debts and legal troubles in Wyoming. He told the townspeople that Ethan had been arrested for horse theft years ago, a complete fabrication. He even tried to convince Josephine herself that Ethan had other women, producing a fake letter supposedly written by a previous lover. Josephine saw through every lie, but the constant barrage was taking its toll. She was exhausted from defending Ethan, from fighting with her cousin, from dealing with the whispers and speculation that followed her everywhere in town. 3 days before the wedding, she rode out to Ethan's ranch in tears. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed out her frustration and anger. "He will not stop," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Every day it is something new, some new lie or accusation. Half the town believes him now. They think you are some kind of confidence man trying to swindle my family." "I know," Ethan said quietly, stroking her hair, "but the people who matter know the truth. Your aunt believes in us, the pastor agreed to marry us, and most importantly, you know who I really am. But what if he finds a way to actually stop the wedding? What if he convinces my aunt to withdraw her permission?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "We could leave tonight. Ride to Carson City and get married there without all the fuss and lies." Josephine pulled back to look at him. "You would do that? Give up the church wedding, the celebration?" "I would give up anything except you," he said simply. "All I want is to make you my wife. Everything else is just details." She thought about it, torn between her desire to have the proper wedding they had planned and her exhaustion with Thomas's interference. Then she shook her head. "No. If we run away, it will look like we had something to hide, like his lies were true. I want to marry you here in front of everyone with our heads held high. I will not let him drive us away." "Then that is what we will do," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. 3 more days and you will be my wife. We can endure anything for 3 days." But Thomas had one final play. On the day before the wedding, he went to the sheriff with a formal complaint, claiming that Ethan had assaulted him at the ranch. He had somehow given himself a black eye and torn his shirt, making it look like there had been a fight. The sheriff, who liked Ethan but was bound by law to investigate, had no choice but to bring Ethan in for questioning. Josephine was at the boarding house helping prepare for the next day's celebration when word reached her. She dropped the flowers she was arranging and ran through town to the sheriff's office, her heart pounding with fear and fury. Ethan was sitting calmly in a chair, the sheriff looking apologetic as he took his statement. Thomas stood to one side, his false black eye already starting to fade, revealing the makeup underneath. "This is ridiculous," Josephine said, bursting in. "Sheriff, you know as well as I do that Ethan would never assault anyone without cause." "I know, Miss Owens, but I have to follow procedure." "Mr. Owens here has made a formal complaint, based on lies," Josephine said, rounding on her cousin. "What did you do, punch yourself? Or did you pay someone to do it for you?" Thomas's smug expression faltered slightly. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Your fiancé attacked me when I went to have a civilized conversation with him. The only conversation we had ended with me telling you to get off my property," Ethan said calmly. "I never laid a hand on him, and he knows it." The sheriff looked between them, clearly trying to determine who was telling the truth. Then Josephine noticed something, a smudge of dark powder under Thomas's eye that did not quite match his skin tone. "Sheriff, would you mind asking my cousin to wash his face?" she said. "I believe you will find his injuries are not quite as real as he claims." Thomas's face went white. "That is absurd. I will not unless you are refusing to cooperate with an official investigation," the sheriff said, his tone sharpening. He had clearly noticed the powder, too. "Because that would be a problem, Mr. Owens." Cornered, Thomas had no choice. The sheriff brought him a basin of water, and as he washed his face, the supposed black eye washed away with it, revealing unmarked skin underneath. The sheriff's expression turned thunderous. "You filed a false report. That is a crime, Mr. Owens." "It was just a misunderstanding," Thomas said desperately. You thought you could manipulate the law to interfere with my wedding," Josephine said coldly. "You have lied, cheated, and slandered a good man's name, all because you could not accept my choice." "Well, it ends now, Thomas. Sheriff, I want to file a formal complaint against my cousin for harassment and filing a false report." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I think that is very appropriate, Miss Owens. Mr. Owens, you are going to spend the night in a cell while I decide what charges to file. And Mr. Keller, you are free to go. My apologies for the trouble." Ethan stood, taking Josephine's hand. "No apologies necessary, Sheriff. You were just doing your job." They walked out of the sheriff's office together into the golden light of late afternoon. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and word of what had happened was already spreading. By evening, everyone in Reno would know that Thomas Owens had been exposed as a liar and that Ethan Keller had been vindicated. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly as they walked back toward the boarding house, "for believing in me, for fighting for us." "Always," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "Tomorrow, no matter what, I am going to marry you." The next day dawned clear and beautiful, perfect weather for a wedding. Josephine woke in her little room at the boarding house for the last time, her white dress hanging ready, her heart full of joy and anticipation. Thomas was still in jail, facing charges that would likely see him fined heavily and possibly imprisoned. Aunt Martha was bustling around making final preparations, happier than Josephine had seen her in years. The church was packed when Josephine arrived on her aunt's arm. It seemed like the entire town had turned out, partly to celebrate the wedding and partly to show their support after the ordeal with Thomas. Josephine barely noticed them. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, standing at the altar in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face shining with love as he watched her walk down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They spoke their vows clearly, both of them meaning every word. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and Ethan kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Josephine felt tears of pure happiness streaming down her face as she looked up at her husband, this wonderful man who had saved her life in more ways than one. The celebration at the boarding house was joyous and lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing, and Ethan proved to be surprisingly good at the latter, spinning Josephine around the floor until she was dizzy with laughter. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, they slipped away, riding back to the ranch together under a sky full of stars. "Happy?" Ethan asked as they rode, his arms around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josephine said, leaning back against him. "I love you, Ethan Keller." "I love you too, Joe Keller," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "My brave, beautiful wife." The first year of their marriage was not easy. The ranch demanded constant work, the winters were harsh, and money was often tight. But they faced every challenge together, and Josephine discovered she loved the life more than she ever could have imagined. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to manage the household accounts. Ethan built her a bookshelf and filled it with volumes ordered from San Francisco, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire reading together, just as content in silence as in conversation. In the spring of 1883, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. Ethan was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and insisting she rest more, work less. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. Their first child, a son they named Samuel, was born in January of 1884 during another harsh Nevada winter. Josephine labored for nearly a full day before the doctor and midwife from town arrived to help, and Ethan paced the floor in terror, convinced he was going to lose her the same way he had almost lost her in the river. But Josephine was strong, and Samuel arrived healthy and squalling with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. Ethan held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are lucky," Josephine corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "All three of us." Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter, Margaret, was born in 1886, followed by another son, Henry, in 1889. The ranch prospered as well. Ethan's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and buy more land. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, with Josephine insisting on a separate room that she could use as a library and office. In 1890, opportunity knocked in an unexpected way. The owner of the general store in Reno died suddenly, and his widow wanted to sell the business quickly and move back east to be with her family. Josephine saw her chance. "I want to buy it," she told Ethan one evening after the children were in bed. "I know we have been saving for more cattle, but this might be my only opportunity. I could run it in addition to helping here at the ranch, hire some help in town. I have always wanted to run a business, you know that." Ethan listened carefully, then said, "How much is she asking?" Josephine told him the price, holding her breath. It was most of their savings, a huge risk, but Ethan did not hesitate. "If this is what you want, then let us do it. I believe in you, Joe, I always have." With his support, Josephine bought the general store. She renamed it Keller's Mercantile and set about transforming it, expanding the book section dramatically and adding supplies that she knew the ranchers and farmers needed. She hired 2 young women from town to help run it during the days when she needed to be at the ranch, and she spent 3 days a week in town managing the business herself. It was exhausting, balancing the store, the ranch, and 3 young children, but Josephine thrived on the challenge. The store became profitable within the first year, then increasingly successful. She became known as a fair and savvy businesswoman, and Ethan beamed with pride whenever anyone praised his wife's accomplishments. As their children grew, Josephine made sure to tell them the story of how she and their father met. Samuel, the oldest, loved the dramatic tale of the frozen river and his father's heroic rescue. Margaret was more interested in the romance, the courtship, and the wedding. Henry, the youngest, mostly just wanted to hear about the parts with horses. "Did you know right away that you loved Papa?" Margaret asked one evening when she was about 8 years old. Josephine considered the question carefully. "Not right away, no. But I knew he was special from the moment he pulled me from that river. He risked his own life without hesitation to save mine, and that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was. The love came after, but it came because of who he was, the goodness in him." "And when did you know you loved Mama?" Samuel asked his father, who was whittling by the fire. Ethan looked up at Josephine, his eyes soft. "The first time she came to visit after the accident, bringing me that apple pie. She did not have to do that, did not owe me anything. But she came anyway, and she helped me with my mending, and we talked for hours. I realized I had never been so comfortable with anyone, never felt so seen and understood. That was when I knew." "That is so romantic," Margaret sighed. "That is so boring," Henry declared. "Tell us about the time Papa chased down those horse thieves." They all laughed, and the conversation moved on. But later, when the children were asleep, Ethan pulled Josephine close on the porch where they often sat on summer evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. marrying a cowboy instead of someone from the city with money and position. Never, Josephine said firmly. Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Ethan. Love, respect, partnership, a family, the freedom to pursue my dreams. What more could I possibly need? I just want you to be happy, he said, kissing the top of her head. I am, she assured him. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. The years passed peacefully. The children grew strong and capable, learning to work the ranch and help in the store. Samuel proved to have his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Margaret inherited Josephine's love of reading and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Henry was still young, but showed signs of having a talent for carpentry, always building things with scraps of wood. In 1895, Josephine and Ethan celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. They left the children with Aunt Martha, who was now in her 70s, but still spry and delighted to spoil her great nieces and nephews, and took a rare trip alone to Lake Tahoe. Standing on the shore of the vast blue lake, Ethan wrapped his arms around Josephine from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you remember that day I pulled you from the truckee?" he asked. "Every detail," Josephine said. "How could I forget? It changed my entire life." "Mine too. I think about it sometimes, how easily I could have been too late or not been riding along that road at all, how differently everything could have turned out." "But you were there," Josephine said, turning in his arms to face him. "You were there, and you saved me, and we built this beautiful life together. That is what matters." "I would do it again," Ethan said seriously. 1,000 times over I would jump into that frozen river to save you." "I know," Josephine said, reaching up to cup his face. "And I would spend 1,000 lifetimes loving you for it." They kissed then, long and sweet, as the sun sparkled on the lake water and the wind whispered through the pines. 13 years of marriage, and Josephine still felt the same flutter in her heart when Ethan looked at her, still felt that same certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. As 1896 arrived, the Keller family continued to flourish. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the region, and Keller's Mercantile had become a cornerstone of Reno's business community. Josephine had even begun stocking and lending books, turning part of the store into an informal library for the community, fulfilling her old dream in an unexpected way. Samuel, now 12, was already talking about one day running the ranch himself. Margaret, 10, was helping teach some of the younger children in town to read. Henry, 7, had built an impressive collection of wooden toys that he sometimes sold at the store, but Josephine and Ethan were not done growing their family. In the fall of 1896, Josephine gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Charlotte. At 36, Josephine found this pregnancy harder than the previous ones, and the birth was difficult. But she came through it well, and little Charlotte proved to be a happy, easy baby who completed their family perfectly. 4 children, Ethan marveled, holding Charlotte while their other 3 children clustered around to admire their new sister. "We have built quite a legacy, Mrs. Keller." "That we have, Mr. Keller," Josephine agreed, exhausted but content. "That we have." As the years continued to pass, Josephine and Ethan grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They faced hardships, of course, harsh winters, failed crops, sick children, all the normal trials of ranch and family life. But they faced them together, their partnership as strong as ever. Thomas Owens, after serving a brief jail sentence and paying substantial fines, had slunk back to San Francisco in disgrace. They heard occasionally that he had married and gone into business for himself, but he never contacted them again, and they were content to leave that ugly episode in the past. Aunt Martha lived to see all four of her great-nieces and nephews grow into fine young people, before passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1900 at the age of 78. Josephine mourned her deeply, grateful for the years they had together, and for her aunt's blessing on her marriage to Ethan. By 1905, Samuel was a grown man of 21, already taking over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. He had his eye on a girl in town, the daughter of the bank manager, and Josephine suspected a wedding announcement was not far off. Margaret, 19, had indeed become a teacher, running the small school in Reno. Henry, 16, was apprenticing with a carpenter in Virginia City, learning the trade properly. And Charlotte, 9, was her mother's shadow, often found reading in the store or helping with inventory. Josephine was 45 now, her dark hair liberally streaked with silver, her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived. Ethan was 49, his own hair graying but still strong and vital, still capable of a full day's hard work on the ranch. They sat together on their porch one evening, watching the sunset, their hands intertwined as they had been for more than 20 years. "You remember what you told me once?" Josephine asked. "That you did not have much to offer, just a small ranch and a simple life." "I remember," Ethan said. "I was afraid you would realize you could do better and leave. You were wrong, you know. You had everything to offer. Love, respect, partnership, adventure. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined when I was that foolish girl trying to cross a frozen river." "You gave me just as much," Ethan said, raising her hand to kiss it. "You took a lonely cowboy and gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to be grateful for every single day. I am the one who got the better deal." "Then I suppose we are both incredibly lucky," Josephine said, smiling. "That we are," Ethan agreed. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the most dramatic of circumstances and built a lifetime of love from that one frozen moment. Josephine thought back to that terrified girl breaking through the ice, certain she was about to die, and sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force of fate had put Ethan Keller on that river road at exactly the right moment. He had saved her life that day, pulled her from the frozen depths when she had given up hope. But in the years since, they had saved each other in countless small ways, had built something beautiful and lasting from that single act of courage and compassion. In 1906, Samuel indeed proposed to Alice Winters, the banker's daughter, and they were married that spring in a joyful ceremony that filled the same church where Josephine and Ethan had wed 24 years earlier. Watching her son marry, Josephine felt the circle of life completing itself, felt the weight of years and joy and love settling over her like a warm blanket. Samuel and Alice stayed on at the ranch, building their own house nearby and beginning their own family. Josephine and Ethan became grandparents in 1907, when Alice gave birth to a baby boy they named Ethan Jr. Holding her grandson for the first time, Josephine looked over at her husband and saw tears in his eyes, the same wonder and gratitude she felt at this new generation. The years that followed brought more grandchildren, Margaret's marriage to a fellow teacher, Henry's return from Virginia City with his carpentry skills honed, and his own dreams of building fine furniture. Charlotte's growth into a strong, intelligent young woman with her own plans to expand the mercantile. As 1910 arrived and Josephine turned 50, she found herself reflecting on the nearly 3 decades since that January day when the ice broke beneath her feet. So much had changed. The town had grown, the ranch had prospered, her children had become adults with families of their own. But one thing had remained constant, the love between her and Ethan, as deep and true as it had been that first night by the fire in his cabin when they realized what they meant to each other. Ethan was 54 now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, his hands' work roughened and strong. But when he looked at her, his eyes still held that same tenderness, that same devotion that had captured her heart all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked one evening, finding her standing by the window of their bedroom, looking out at the ranch they had built together. "Just remembering," she said, "thinking about how far we have come from that day in the river." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist in a gesture so familiar it felt like coming home. "Best day of my life, pulling you from that water. Best day of mine, opening my eyes and finding you there," Josephine said, leaning back against him. "Everything good in my life started that day." "Everything good in my life started that day too," Ethan agreed. They stood together in the gathering dusk, two souls who had found each other in the most improbable way and built a love that would last lifetimes. The frozen river was long forgotten by most, just another winter story from long ago. But for Josephine and Ethan, it would always be the beginning, the moment when fate or chance or divine providence had brought them together and set them on a path to happiness neither could have imagined. Outside, they could hear Samuel calling to his children, could hear Alice's laughter and the sound of Henry's saw as he worked late in his shop. Their family, their legacy, spreading out around them like ripples from a stone thrown into water. And at the center of it all, the love between a woman who had been drowning and the cowboy who had broken through the ice to save her. A love that had grown stronger with each passing year, weathering every storm and celebrating every joy. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Josephine turned in Ethan's arms and kissed him, a kiss that held 28 years of memories and promises, a kiss that spoke of forever. And in that moment, standing in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find in each other. A love worth saving, a love worth building a lifetime around, a love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry their story into the future. The frozen river had tried to take her, but instead it had given her everything, a hero, a husband, a partner, a love that transcended the ordinary and became something extraordinary. And every day for the rest of their lives, both Josephine and Ethan would be grateful for that one perfect moment when he broke through the ice and pulled her to safety, saving not just her life but both their futures. As they grew older still, into their 60s and 70s, their love never wavered. They became the patriarchs of a sprawling family, respected elders in a community that had watched their love story unfold over decades. And always, on cold winter days when the Truckee River froze over, they would walk down to the bank together and remember, hands clasped tight, hearts full of gratitude for the miracle of that long-ago January day and all the beautiful years that had followed from it. Their story became legend in Reno, told and retold, the cowboy who risked everything to save a drowning woman and the love that bloomed from that single act of courage. And it was a true legend, because every word of it was real, from the breaking ice to the lifetime of devotion that followed. Some love stories are written in the stars, but theirs was written in frozen water and warm hearts, in courage and compassion, in the simple choice to jump into icy darkness to save another soul, and in so doing, to save yourself. As they sat together in their later years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they knew that the frozen river had not been their end, but their beginning, the first chapter in a love story that would never truly end as long as there was someone to remember and someone to tell the tale of the drowning woman and the cowboy who saved her life, then won her heart, and built with her a legacy of love that would endure through generations.